So today, let's look at Nirvana, let's look at karma rebirth, let's look at bodhisattva ideal, and as a part of karma rebirth, I am also going to address young Callum's question from last week about what is the relationship between no self and Buddha nature. And when we get into that, you're going to see why I didn't want to take that on in the last 5 minutes of the Q&A, because it's kind of a thing. So it's a good question. We need to talk about it. It's good that he brought it up, but we will get to that. Okay. So let's begin with Nirvana. And let's let Sawyer manage the camera before I do that so he has something to edit with. Are you feeling okay? All right. So let's begin with Nirvana. So Nirvana is usually paired with samsara, so we have to talk about both of these things. We can't really talk about one without the other. So samsara is this world of greed, anger, delusion that leads to suffering. So I suggest pulling out your handout from last week while we're talking about this and looking again at the wheel, because that middle ring of the wheel has the 6 realms of samsara. When we talked about the 12-fold chain of causation, that was the outside rim, and then the middle rim was the 6 realms of samsara. Sometimes we call that the rokudo. So those 6 realms are, and I think they're on your sheet, the heaven realm. This is the realm of heavenly beings. You would think this is a wonderful place to be. And the problem is these beings are so filled with pleasure and good times and partying that they forget to practice. So they do have some godlike powers. Some of them reign over celestial kingdoms. Most of them live this delightful life of happiness and splendor and all good things. They might live for countless ages. They might have an incredibly long lifespan. And still, this is a realm of samsara. This is not leaping free of the wheel. This is still, beings that are blind to the world of suffering. They're full of pride. They are still attached, right? So even in a heaven realm, we're still in this suffering world of samsara. That's an important thing to know. Then we have the fighting spirits, sometimes called the ashura. Fighting gods, demigods, they have a lot of names. This is a realm of anger and jealousy and constant war and fighting and headbutting and struggling, right? These are demigods who are powerful, but they are fierce, they are quarrelsome, they will pick a fight. This is the way they sort of approach the world. So like humans, they are partly good, partly not so good, right? Partly wholesome, partly unwholesome. Their whole reason for being is they're going to fight. The next realm is the human realm. So again, human beings, partly good, partly not so good, right? Not entirely one or the other. This is the realm where awakening is possible. This is the only realm where awakening is possible. So most human beings are consumed by desire and greed, anger and ignorance and suffering. So awakening is not easy. But this is why Dogen says in Fukanza Zengi, do not, you have the pivotal opportunity of human form, do not pass your days and nights in vain. The reason is this is the only place to do this. Next realm is the animal realm. This is the realm of stupidity and servitude. So this is not casting aspersions on your cats and dogs, but it's looking around and saying, if you're an ox, you're probably, pulling a plow. If you are an animal, you are probably not thinking at a highly intellectual level. You are driven by instinct, right? You are not, this is not a realm in which you can practice. Then we have the hungry ghosts. This is a realm of sort of craving, eternal starvation. If you look at images of hungry ghosts, they are beings with very large bellies and tiny, tiny necks. So they want all the time. They're hungry all the time, but they can't get anything in. So there's just this constant craving, this constant desire. The last realm here is the hell realm. This is the lowest, worst realm of torture and aggression and suffering, right? Nobody wants to be in a hell realm. I have always found it interesting that I think Japanese culture is the king of hell realms. There's like 21 hells. There's hot hells and cold hells, and there's just a lot of hells. So it isn't even like there's just one big hell. There's really specific hells. Like if you do a lot of false speech, there's a hell where your tongue gets plowed every day. I mean, there's really specific. So those are our 6 realms in this world of samsara: heaven, fighting spirits, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and the hell realm. And this is how we go around and around and around and around and around. So the early tradition said our delusion and our suffering cause us to be reborn again and again and again somewhere on this wheel. So we might be living as humans, we make a bad mistake, the next time around we're born in the animal realm, or we're born in the hell realm, we have to work our way back up, right? So this constant transmigration. So what realm you land in your next life depends on what you do in this life. So where you practice and you completely understand the nature of self and you let go of the 3 poisons, then you finally leap free from this wheel of 6 realms altogether. And you go somewhere else called Nirvana. So when you look at how this wheel is usually drawn, there's Yama, the god of death, the lord of death, that's hanging onto this wheel, right? So what do we want to do? We want to leap free from this entire situation. And then we end up in a place that somehow we call Nirvana. So this is the process in the early teachings of coming to deeply recognize, deeply understand Buddhist truths, like Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path and how suffering arises and all of that stuff. If we deeply, deeply see that, not just as an intellectual exercise, but like we really, really get that, right? Then we reach enlightenment or attain awakening or catapult ourselves somehow to Nirvana. Then we're never, if that happens, supposedly we're never reborn again, never born again into this world, the suffering world of samsara. But this is a process that in this tradition takes many, 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 many lifetimes. So in the early teachings, it takes Shakyamuni something like 500 lives as a bodhisattva before he's finally born as Siddhartha Gautama and actually achieves this awakening and leaps free, right? So by doing good, our conditions might improve bit by bit by bit until finally, ultimately, you get to be reborn as a monk. Because lay people and women, of course, can't possibly leap free of this wheel. You have to be a monk, and you have to practice, and then you have this opportunity, right? So you could, when you're a monk and you leave home and you leave behind your family and your social obligations, you can spend all your time practicing. That is your pivotal opportunity, finally, to leap free of this wheel. So I'm being a little bit snarky about that, right? But so if you were a lay person or you were a woman, the best you could hope for was be reborn as a monk. That was your chance. Okay, so samsara is a place where these 3 poisons and our suffering feels like the world is on fire. Sometimes when I'm talking about how are we just moving through the everyday world and we know that there's suffering in the world, let's say things like how are we, encountering this world on fire. Something's on fire. Nirvana is a place where those fires get blown out, and that's the root of this word. Those fires of delusion and confusion and 3 poisons and suffering get literally blown out. So it's like blowing out a candle, right? So as we saw last week in talking about the 4 undeniable realities, Nirvana is where we've seen, again, this true nature of the self. The fires of delusion and suffering have gone out. We're no longer creating the conditions for rebirth, going around and around and around on this wheel. So the reality is, if that's one of the 4, undeniable realities, the reality is it is possible to do this if we practice. We take on the Eightfold Path. And again, the human realm is the only realm in which we can actually take that on. If we're animals, we're not thinking about that. If we're in the heavenly realm, we're distracted. We don't think we're suffering. If we're fighting spirits, we're spending all of our time fighting, right? So human realm, this human life, is where we get to practice. So this is why we hear our ancestors saying, practice as though your head was on fire. Practice right now, don't waste your time, because this is your chance. Okay, now when we talk about samsara and nirvana from the Mahayana perspective, things are a little different because the teaching is samsara and nirvana are both right here. There is no leaping off a wheel and going somewhere else at some future time, leaving behind something which is separate and going to somewhere else in the future. There is only here and now. And samsara and nirvana are both right here. So there is no such thing as crossing to another shore. So right in the middle of this world of suffering is also the world of emptiness. Now we've talked about emptiness. Emptiness simply that conditioned things have no fixed permanent self nature. So right in the middle of form is the world of emptiness. Right in the world of samsara and suffering is this world of nirvana. So it's hard to describe that. We're functioning in this world of karmic conditions, and at the same time, we see that impermanence, we see the emptiness, we see the interconnectedness, we see that this small self, our ideas about small self as a fabrication, until we kind of experience that, it's hard to describe. Nirvana is one of those ineffable things that we can't usually really use language to talk about. Language is limited because, like all conditioned things, it arises from something. Nirvana is unlimited, unconditioned reality. So there's no way to wrap our intellectual brains around that. There's no way to put words around that, right? So in conditioned reality, our view of the world is based on the ways we're conditioned to think, our habituated responses, our limited experience, our understanding, the assumptions we get from our culture, our training, whatever. Nirvana is unlimited, unconditioned. It's said to be like waking up from a dream and then realizing that that dream is an illusion, right? You take a nap, you sleep real hard, you have some kind of a dream, you wake up and you realize, oh, that existence that I thought I was living in this dream is completely a story. It's completely illusory. We get to see through that, and we see that our fabricated self is like that. So Buddha never said what nirvana was like, right? He was silent on that topic. But there is a story in the tradition of a turtle trying to describe dry land to a fish. Of course, fishes never experienced dry land. So this turtle is using only adjectives from the fish's world, and he's saying it's not this, it's not this, it's not like that, because you can't put words around it. All you can say is it's not like this. So this turtle is using fish's language and saying, well, it's not like this, it's not like this. The fish hears all this and concludes, well, if it's not any of these very familiar things, then dry land must not exist. Whatever this thing is you're trying to describe must not actually exist. And the turtle says, well, just because you can't imagine it doesn't mean it's not reality. And I think we sort of have to bear that in mind in our practice with some of these teachings, right? We might not yet have direct experience of something. It might not be something that can be described, something which is unconditioned, unlimited. I mean, there's no way we can imagine what that's like. And yet, this is where faith comes in, right? Somehow our ancestors had some experience of this, and I think we can trust them, right? So just because we can't imagine nirvana, we can't imagine thusness, emptiness, awakening, any of these things we can't describe, it's not a reason to say, well, that doesn't exist, or that's separate from here. So that's a challenge in our practice. So let's keep an open mind. Let's keep a spirit of inquiry. It can be really easy, I think, for us in a otherwise sort of rational North American mindset to go superstition, outdated, cultural trapping, no, 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 no. Okay, well, maybe. And also, let's keep an open mind. Okay, karma, reincarnation, or rebirth. And again, this is another week where all of these things are not, all of these three topics are not separate from each other. So we're going to go back and forth a bit. So karma and reincarnation. Buddha says, of course, there is no fixed and permanent self. We learned that when we talked about emptiness. But still, somehow, early Buddhists believed in reincarnation. So even the Buddha had visions of his past lives. He's sitting under the Bodhi tree. He's trying to get to the root of suffering. He has visions of his past lives. How can that be? How can we reconcile these two things? So I think a useful image is if we think of a flame on a candle, and we're passing that flame from one candle to another. The first flame is the cause of the second, but you wouldn't say it's the same flame. You wouldn't say that flame has been sort of reborn over here, right? Something's been passed. Some energy, some life, some forces have been passed. The other image I like is one ocean wave tends to set up another ocean wave, and yet we can distinctly see there are ocean waves. It's not like one sort of takes on the form of the next and disappears. So we set causes and conditions in motion in this life, and then somehow those forces continue after we leave the physical world. And I think we can all think of some example of that, right? Somehow an ancestor we had did something and set some forces in motion, and we are still affected by that. I think I've given the example of we've all probably had immigrant ancestors. Somebody makes a choice to get on a boat, and look at how different our life would be, right, if that hadn't happened. There's something that carries forward, right? So although there's no sort of, in this tradition, there's no soul that sort of inherits a different human body, it doesn't work like that. There's just this continuing function of the universe along this trajectory of causes and conditions. So something happens, right, and human beings keep getting born, and moment by moment things continue to arise, and that is a way that we can look at rebirth or reincarnation. Rebirth is better in this context. So karma is about cause and effect, right? We all know karma is about cause and effect. So doing good, bringing wholesomeness into this world will result in something positive, probably liberation from suffering for ourselves and others. Doing something unwholesome in this world, carrying something not so nice into this world, results in something negative, which is probably suffering for ourselves or for other beings. So that means our experience of our circumstances is of our own making. The circumstances might be out of our control, but our experience of those circumstances is of our own making. So just like our practice can only be done by ourselves, no one can practice for us, we also have some control over our experience of things. Our habituated thinking is a chain that gets moving. Oh, this thing always happens to me. Oh, it's always like this. Really? So our habits sort of come into play here. So we can take responsibility for what we do in the world and for the result of that for ourselves and for other beings. The force of our actions of body, speech, and mind, that's the three places we create karma, right? That's all we can use, body, speech, and mind. So that is connected with teachings about karma. So the force of that, whatever our actions are, body, speech, and mind, that's what shapes our situation, our experience, our destiny. Right? We have a hand in that. We are not sort of victims of random stuff. Having said that, we need to be really careful not to twist this teaching and use it to blame the victim, because historically that's been done. It would be easy to say to somebody who is suffering, that's your fault. I'm not going to help you. Right? You have inherited some unwholesome, unhappy condition, you are living in poverty, or you are discriminated against, or you have health issues, or whatever that is, and that's all your fault from your past lives. You must have done terrible things, so you're on your own. Does that sound like a bodhisattva to you? We have to be really, really careful. I think we can fall into that kind of pitfall the same way we can use precepts as a yardstick to judge people. Oh, you broke such and so precept, so somehow I'm better than you, right? We have to be really careful with all of these teachings. These are not things we use to judge and evaluate other people. These are things we use to look at our own life, our own practice, our own actions of body, speech, and mind, and say, how could I be more wholesome? How can I let go of unwholesomeness, right? So it is not okay to be looking at other people, passing judgment, blaming them for something, right? Again, doesn't mean we don't deal with toxic behavior. It means we do that with wisdom and compassion. So at some point then, these karmic forces that we've set in motion will come to an end. We can stop perpetuating the suffering that goes around and around on the 12-fold chain, on the wheel of samsara. That is the point, of course, of the Fourth Noble Truth. There is something we can do. So we can cultivate wisdom and compassion. We can see the true nature of self. We can stop doing things that keep us trapped in this transmigration through these 6 realms of samsara. So that might, if we want to take it as, yes, this is a literal rebirth in another realm, we can. We can also look at just our moment-by-moment experience that says, I stubbed my toe and I'm in a hell realm, and now I'm really sleepy and I'm in an animal realm, and the next moment I see my best friend and I'm in a heaven realm, and we're just going around and around. Right? That can be a moment-by-moment, very direct experience of this life right here. We can see how samsara and nirvana are not separate. So, many North Americans are not so comfortable with this teaching about a literal rebirth or a literal reincarnation. Even Toto-san says, I don't believe in that. So I think we have permission to say, how else can we practice with that teaching? There's something valuable there, even if we're not saying there's a literal sort of body being reborn. And again, remember, Buddhism comes up in a Hindu container. So some of this begins before Buddhism, right? Shakyamuni inherits a certain amount of culture, Vedic culture. So if you want to go backwards and sort of look at how that comes to be, you're welcome to do that. So if our moment-to-moment existence, our moment-to-moment activity is based on delusion, then we're going to keep setting up suffering in the next moment, right? We're going to keep setting up those karmic conditions. Suffering's going to keep happening. We're going to be born in the next moment, if you will, surrounded by the greed, anger, and ignorance that we've perpetuated. We're going to keep that chain going. We're going to keep clinging to ego. We're going to really deeply root those habits of unwholesomeness, right? There's something that's going to keep going around. If instead our activity is based on wisdom, it's based on compassion, clear seeing, understanding the nature of self, right? Then in the next, we're sort of born into the next moment, if you will, released from that kind of suffering, because we're setting up positive, wholesome conditions for ourselves and for other beings. So, experiencing nirvana in this moment, not separate from samsara, means we're still here in the physical world. We're living like normal people. Nobody has a golden glow. Nobody becomes transparent. And while that's happening, there's also no attachment to this thing we call I. So this is when zazen is doing zazen, floor sweeping is doing floor sweeping, right? Dishwashing is doing dishwashing, walking is doing walking. There is no separation into a self and an action and an outcome, right? There's no one experiencing something. There is just the activity happening. There is no separation. There's just this smooth functioning. So no karma is being created, and eventually those forces that perpetuate suffering run out. That energy runs out. So, the Buddha woke up under the tree and still had to live out his 80 years in this physical form because that force was still running out. So he's no longer generating karma, but something still has to run out. And when those forces run out, then he leaps free of the wheel. So goes the tradition. So Dogen says we also need to have faith that just like everything else, our karma is impermanent. We can feel like we're stuck. Right? I'm stuck in this world of samsara. Dogen says, well, don't forget, just like everything else, karma is impermanent. So we are, if we make some effort to establish an ethical life, to carry out skillful action, to pay attention to what Buddha is teaching, then in this moment, we're influencing the karma we're creating with body, speech, and mind. We can always be looking at what am I doing with this body and with what I'm saying, and even with what I'm thinking. Because, of course, first we think something, and we say something, and we take some action on something. So we can't act in the past. We can't fix anything that's already happened by going back and doing it differently. Like we all know that, but somehow we think we can go backwards and fix something. We can't do that. We can't act in the future because that hasn't come yet. We can make a plan for it. We can think about it, but we're thinking about it in this moment. That's not acting in the future. So we can't act in the past. We can't act in the future. Right now, we can reaffirm our aspiration to practice rather than to perpetuate some kind of unwholesome, habituated activity. So vow and repentance, right? We haven't talked about that, but vow and repentance. So karma doesn't have any fixed permanent self-nature because nothing does. So at some point, karma arises and changes and unfolds, and we are not stuck in the same circumstances or the same condition that we're in. So we can choose right now. A life of practice and awakening, or a life of something else. We get to choose. So again, we can't often see the unfolding of karma. As we mentioned last time, something happens, and maybe we don't see the effects of that for 100 years, or it happens somewhere away from us, right? We don't always know. We can't see that unfolding, so it takes faith, right, to keep at it, to keep doing the good things and avoiding the unwholesome things. And sort of trusting that when we're putting wholesomeness into the world, we are perpetuating something good. We might not see that right away. But somehow we need to trust that the entire network of interdependent origination is benefited if we're doing beneficial action. We're doing good action. So sometimes we have a big ship to turn. We have a lot of harmful conditions to work with. Might take a long time. So faith is important, right? There's big things we're doing and there's little things we're doing, and maybe we're working towards some major shift. We've got to have some patience with ourselves and compassion for ourselves. So, understanding no self is central to understanding nirvana, and now we have to look at the relationship between no self and Buddha nature. So, we're getting to the Buddha nature. So, you may have heard that Dogen taught all sentient beings are Buddha nature, as opposed to previous teaching which said all sentient beings have Buddha nature. So now I need to explain what Buddha nature is. So that's going to take a minute. This is why we're doing this now and not at the end of the last meeting. So historically there was this question about whether or not there were beings who were inherently incapable of awakening. Is there a being which is inherently incapable of awakening? And if that kind of being exists, then they're condemned to go around and around and around forever on this wheel of samsara and rebirth and Is there such a being? The Mahayana response is, well, the self is empty of any kind of fixed and permanent self-nature. So this is the no self piece, right? So there is nothing that could be inherently capable or incapable of awakening. If the self is empty, then there's no You can't make a distinction. So another response was something called the Tathagata doctrine, which says what beings had was the potential to become Buddha. Right? So this casts Buddha nature as a potential to become Buddha. So in China, people start thinking, well, this potential is called Buddha nature. Right? That led to two kind of related positions. So on the one hand, whatever happens is my karma. I'm resigned to it. There's nothing I can do. I did something, and now I'm feeling the result of that, and I can't escape from the result of that, and so I have no agency. There's nothing I can do. The other position is, well, whatever I do is already a manifestation of Buddha nature, so I can do whatever I want, right? There is nothing that isn't a manifestation of this Buddha nature, so regardless of rules, regardless of ethics, it doesn't matter what I do. And when I look at those two positions, I say, well, they come down to the same thing. We're trapped. Right? We have no agency. So this is where Dogen's great doubt happens. Now you might be familiar with Dogen's great doubt because he says, if all beings have Buddha nature, why do we have to practice? What's the point of that? So of course he's originally ordained and practicing in the Chentai school in China. Chentai school taught this original enlightenment rather than acquired enlightenment. In other words, everyone already has Buddha nature. It is not something we acquire. And Dogen says, well then, if that's true, why are we killing ourselves to practice? Because practice is hard. Why are we doing this? And yet, he looks around and we all look around and say, well, there is suffering and delusion in the world and we need to make some effort. Clearly things are not optimal, right? Clearly things could be better. So, like, what's going on? So in the end, Dogen's conclusion is Buddha nature is not a thing. Here's another problem with language. This is another one of those things we can't actually put words around. Buddha nature is not a thing. It is not a state. It is not the potential for something. It's not an essence. It's not a soul. It's not power. It's not anything substantial. So Buddha nature is being, but it's not being like, well, there's being and non-being. Buddha nature is functioning. So a related teaching, if you want to go look somewhere about this, is the teachings about Jiju Yudzamai, this sort of universal functioning, right? So anything that exists is changing. We know from impermanence, is functioning, is moving. Being is not a static condition. There's no thing like being, and it's just rigid and inflexible and never changes. We know because of impermanence, being is in constant motion. So it can't be a thing, right? So Buddha nature is all beings or all dharmas simply doing what they do as a part of universal functioning. They're simply carrying out their function, living their lives, doing what they do, behaving the way they behave. So the ultimate truth is not some timeless principle called Buddha nature, right? It is what is actually going on around us every moment, right? So Buddha nature is not about what we create out of our perceptions, our processing minds, our ideas, our intellect about what could this thing be called Buddha nature. Dogen is careful to say Buddha nature is also not the self. It is not our consciousness. It is not some psychological element. There's nothing we can sort of pull out of our psyche and go, that's Buddha nature. It is not enlightenment or awakening. It is not anything that has a permanent essence, a soul. It's not anything we can sort of write a story about and then grab the story and say, well, that's Buddha nature. That's my idea about Buddha nature. It's non-substantial. So it's also not limited to the mind or the body or some result of zazen, like I'm going to sit zazen in order to get Buddha nature. That won't work, right? So we don't have or acquire Buddha nature for two reasons. One is it's already here, right? There's nothing to get. If Dogen says we already are Buddha nature, then there's nothing to get. There is no, I'm going to go out and acquire Buddha nature. The other reason is that from the point of view of emptiness, or the absolute, there is nothing separate called Buddha nature and no separate human being to acquire it. Now we're back to this thing about separation between someone doing something and the activity and the outcome, right? In the world of emptiness, that's not how things are. So there's no way that there's an I who can take some action to get something called Buddha nature, right? So any conception of Buddha nature as something, particularly something out there, misses the mark. So we can sort of now see this relationship between teachings about no self, about the self being empty, and teachings about Buddha nature. If you really want to dig into these things, they can become rather technical, but I invite you to do it. Dogen wrote an entire fascicle called Busho about Buddha nature. Toto-san gave, I think, 27 lectures on it over 3 Genzo-ways. It's one of the longest fascicles in the Shobo Genzo. So one of your study questions or your next steps questions in your handout is about go find Buddha nature, go find Busho, and read and study that piece. So it's a big topic for us, and it's not something we easily just sit down and go, oh, I'm going to look that up in the dictionary, right? So Callum, thank you for that question. I hope that was enough to get somebody started and at least begin to create that relationship in people's minds. Okay, questions so far, the small ones. Topics, terms. I saw you and then you. Will.
Okay. The different realms of samsara. Historically, were these posed as literal realms, and as we've gotten to modern times, more metaphorical?
I would say probably in the early days, people took those to be, well, I was going to say physical realms. That's misleading. I'm going to say in the early days, people probably thought, yes, I'm going to physically be reborn in a realm of humans, animals, hungry ghosts. I mean, of course, I didn't live then. I can't say. But my guess is it was taken more literally.
At least in the Tibetan Book of the Dead it is.
Well, there you go. That's true.
And then my other question is understanding karma. Is there such thing as good karma, or is karma is wholesome deeds the absence of karma?
Well, so I would say provisionally we can say there is wholesome and unwholesome karma. And in the world of emptiness, we can't make any distinction. There is just an outcome, and the good or the bad or the wholesome or unwholesome is my idea, because it is good or bad for me, or good or bad for something, right? So I think
the word just translates as action.
yeah, yeah, which would mean it has no charge, But I think in the world of human beings, we want to do wholesome things and not do unwholesome things, and so then we have to have a way to say something is wholesome or not. I see a hand up there. I will get to you. Enough, Rachel.
Yeah, I had a question about karma as well.
Everyone has questions about karma.
I'm sure I'll continue questioning this.
That's good. You should.
But you said the phrase, I think at a certain point, no karma is being created.
Yep.
I guess I don't understand that, because even if you're trying to, or even if you're living 100% wholesome actions, just by being alive, you're going to create destruction and death, right? So how can you explain how you would have no karma being created?
Not easily. I think that's worth thinking about. So again, I'm reminded that here's Shakyamuni wakes up under the Bodhi tree, and yet he doesn't disappear. He has to live out the remainder of this human life, and you've got to think that while he was living out that human life, he couldn't help but step on a bug. So how did he not get reborn? Now, somebody smarter than me probably knows the answer to that. And I think part of the reason I don't have a ready answer for that is that in this kind of tradition, we so often say, well, there's good and bad, and then there's going beyond good and bad. So we're not thinking so much about trying to leap off a wheel. We're saying, how do we see both of those things, or how do we see samsara and nirvana are both here, right? So somebody who's smarter than I am and more well-versed in that is going to need to, at some point, speak up. I don't have a good answer for you.
Well, I heard you saying on the YouTube video, I think it was the previous one, when you were talking about the Eastern concept of nothingness, or something needing no, is not the way that we would in the Greco-Roman tradition think of no.
Right.
And so the idea of no karma means that the karma itself is insubstantial. It lacks any identity onto itself. It is part and parcel of the ongoing process, so there's no fixed nature to it.
Got it. Okay, I understand that, and if others don't understand that, that's okay. This is where things start to get technical, and why I'm saying there's a lot in this group that I'm just going to say I'm going to put this in front of you, and then please continue to do discernment, and please continue to read and ask, and right. So I feel like I haven't helped you, Rachel, and please continue to question.
So I think that helps a little bit.
Good.
Thank you,
Ritoku.
better understanding. I'll continue to explore that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritoku. Someone's got a hand up and I can't see. Is it Bob?
Yep.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah. Thank you. The first question that somebody asked a few spaces to your right, I think. you talked about are the realm, how the realms are taken, and in the early days they were kind of taken literally, but I didn't get either missed it or but currently, how are they taken? Are they taken literally, physically?
Well, so I think within the world of the Mahayana, it's not as literal as it would have been in the early days. Now, I have to say, my practice container is North America. I know North America better than anything else, and I think I would be hard pressed to find a North American who would take it literally. I think it would be more metaphorical here, and I'm going to venture to say that might be true in general, but I don't want to speak for anybody, right? But when I hear even Toto-san saying, yeah, this rebirth thing, I don't quite believe in that. And when he talks about going around and around the realms of samsara, he's very much talking about our experience of here and now. And so I'm sort of taking it that way, right?
Okay, thank you.
You bet. I think that's Callum has a hand up.
Hi, I was just wondering with the Buddha nature, because all beings are the Buddha nature, would you say that there's nothing else going on but Buddha nature? That like the entire universe is just Buddha nature functioning?
Yes, because there's nothing outside of it. So there isn't something we can point to and say, this is not Buddha nature, this is not Buddha functioning, right? There's no way to make a separation. So quick answer to your question is yes.
And then is there any way to access Okamura Roshi's talks about the Busho fascicle online?
Well, the quick answer to that was not yet.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Dogen Institute, I think, has one, maybe two.
Do they?
Gensways available, but the third definitely not.
But the third, no. Okay, so go out to the Dogen Institute. It looks like you can get maybe parts 1 and 2, and third one's still in production.
Yeah. Thank you.
My hope is that at some point we actually make a book out of that. I've actually said to Toto-san, in fact, this week we need your Busho book. But we don't have it yet. Okay. All right. Other things before we go to bodhisattva. We good for now? I get that this stuff is technical and confusing. Right?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment.
Make a comment.
On karma.
On karma. Well, I know that's something you're particularly interested in.
Yep. One, there's a book out there, Karma, What It Is, What It's Not. It's a good book.
Karma and What It Is and What It's Not. Who wrote it?
And Why It Matters.
And Why It Matters. Okay, somebody knows. Who wrote it? Do you have it in front of you?
I can go to the other room and get it real quick. I'll be right back.
At some point before the end, just in case someone wants to follow up, because anybody who's found a good resource, let's share a good resource. But your comment was going to be?
My comment was going to be that on karma, it is a really, really good example of interdependent origination and emptiness. Because you have your karma, you have your actions. They're coming and they're dealing with other people, everything around you. When I talked about it the other day, I listed many different types of karma: social, cultural, temporal. Dude, what's going on, right? And you have all of those intermixing and intermingling, and it's also at the same time it changes. You change. When you deal with it. When you encounter it or it affects you, absolutely. Right. It's not something permanent. It's not something, and it's not something that it's not something permanent, and it's also not something that is that comes down and thrown at you. That's more like the Vedic side of Hinduism.
It's not so personal.
Yeah.
So it's like a process philosopher Whitehead, every difference makes a difference. So your karma and my karma, same karma, because we live in each other's environment.
Yep. Yeah, which is an interesting way to think about karma, isn't it? Because it can feel really personal. And in the big world, we can also say it isn't. So, good.
So there's a mantra for you, don't take it personally.
Don't take it personally. Every difference makes a difference. So someone's in the chat, do we need to do anything with that? Just in case someone's asking. Name of the book? Oh, fantastic. There we go. Thanks, Bob. I was going to say, let's put that in the chat.
I'm going to write the author in the chat. I'm doing the
Great.
right.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing a question up there, so. Okay, because certainly anytime somebody's got a resource that's really speaking to them and you want to let people know about it, I'm for that. That's something that's really useful that can come from this group. Okay, Bodhisattva ideal. So in week 1, we looked at all the major streams of Buddhism and we said one of the ways we can characterize or differentiate between them is the ideal practitioner. In each case, there's an ideal practitioner. So in the Mahayana, that ideal is the bodhisattva. So bodhisattva means awakened being, someone who is maybe qualified, if you will, to leap off this wheel of samsara, to land on the other side, but chooses to stay here in order to help other beings cross over first, to liberate other beings. So the bodhisattva's vow is to be the last one to cross over, which of course is really ironic because if everyone is saying, no, no, you go first, if we're all bodhisattvas, you want everyone to go before you, and the other one next to you is going, no, no, you first, then, there can't be a last one out. So I think it's an illustration of sort of the endlessness of our bodhisattva vows.
We have to save them all, and there's infinite numbers, so
we'll never get to the end. That's right. Okay, so traditionally, the distinction between the Arhat from the Theravadan side and the Mahayana bodhisattva was the Arhat is said to mainly be practicing for his own liberation. The bodhisattva is said to be practicing for the liberation of everybody, for the sake of everyone. Now, we have to recognize that's a characterization coming from the Mahayana side. Let's not start disparaging people, right? So we need to recognize that. But it's important for us to understand what the characteristics of the bodhisattva are. So there's this grouping called the 4 great bodhisattvas. Maybe you know these bodhisattvas. So each of these 4 symbolizes a specific aspect of our practice or something which is important in our tradition. So we have Kannon, we have Fugen, Monju, and Jizo. So there's a lot you can read about these bodhisattvas. There are whole books written about some of these bodhisattvas by contemporary, North American teachers in some cases. There are many images to look at. You can get into the iconography. So if this is interesting for you, I invite you to dig in. So Kannon, Chinese, Guanyin, and Sanskrit Avalokiteshvara. You will see him or her characterized by all of those names. So like most of these bodhisattvas, this is an image or a figure that starts out in India as a male figure. It's now mostly portrayed as a female figure, which is a whole interesting story. Yes. So there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of forms of Kannon. Some of them have names and some of them are simply the ways she's been depicted. She's one of the most popular bodhisattvas in Asia, so you can hardly not find a Kannon or an Avalokiteshvara. There are also multiple versions of her name, but overall this name has a meaning about hearing the cries of people who are suffering in the world. So this is somebody who is attentive to, aware of, hearing the cries of people who are suffering. So Kannon appears in the Lotus Sutra. She appears in the Avatamsaka Sutra. Of course, she's in the Heart Sutra that we chant every morning. There's plenty of scripture about Kannon. She's also frequently in the genre of Buddhist miracle tales, taking whatever form seems to be necessary. Usually there's a figure or there's a character in the story, and by the time you get to the end of the story, oh, it turns out that was Kannon. There to save whoever it is that needs to be saved. So even Dogen was supposedly delivered from disaster by Kannon. He's taking his ship back to Japan from China. They had a bad storm. Supposedly Kannon appears floating on the waves next to the boat to save Dogen and to save the ship. So even Dogen had plenty to say about Kannon. Fugen is the bodhisattva of practice. So Fugen or Pushin or Samantabhadra. So if you're here for Rakusatsu and you hear us invoking all those bodhisattvas, one that we do, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, great activity. So Fugen is often depicted holding a lotus flower and riding an elephant. This is the great power of Buddhist practice to overcome things. So the elephant, is strong and will overcome obstacles, and that's kind of the point of that iconography. So the emphasis from Fugen is that action and conduct or behavior are just as important in our practice as thinking and studying and sitting zazen. So what we do, again, with this body, speech, and mind is all about that. That's what Fugen is sort of overseeing for us. There's also connection here with taking and upholding precepts, with the Shila section of the Eightfold Path, right, action, speech, livelihood. So this is very much about what are we doing in the world. That's what Fugen is typically about. Interestingly, Fugen is the protector of the people who teach the Dharma. So I think of Fugen as the patron saint of Dharma teachers. So Dharma teachers like Fugen. Okay, Monju, or Wenshu, or Manju Shri is the bodhisattva of wisdom. That's who's here in our place where we sit Zazen. That's usually in a Soto in Japan, you will see Manju Shri there. It's not Shakyamuni. So frequently Manjushri or Monju is depicted with a sword in one hand. Ours is not. Ours is sitting Zazen. But if you see a bodhisattva with a sword in one hand, that's probably Manjushri. That sword is for cutting through ignorance, right? So when Esho did her Hosenshiki, one of the things that she had to say was about, the sword taking life and giving life freely, right? So we're cutting through ignorance. Sometimes there's a sword in one hand and a sutra book in the other, which makes sense for a being that's all about wisdom. Typically, Monju is sitting on a lion, like this one. That lion is usually roaring. You might be familiar with that image of a roaring lion as being the voice of Buddha, or the voice of Dharma, right? That is Dharma teaching. So it's no coincidence there's a popular Buddhist magazine called The Lion's Roar, right?
Here he is with the sword.
There you go. So if you want to see from Ritoku, you can pass that around. You can see the version right with the sword. As I say, Monju on our altar appears as a monk sitting Zazen, sitting on this lion. That's not uncommon in the world of a Japanese sort of Soto. There is a Shaka triad, or a group of 3 of these bodhisattvas that sometimes you will see with Fugen on the right, Monju on the left, Shakyamuni in the middle. So if you're looking around, you might see them grouped together. Somehow they're functioning together. So you've got activity, you have wisdom, and you've got awakening, right? Shakyamuni in the middle. Okay, Jizo, or Dizang, or Chittagarbha, is the bodhisattva of patience and salvation from suffering. Jizo is actually fairly popular in North America, probably second to Kanoan. You see lots of little cute Jizos, right? Go into your local, New Age shop, and there's probably little Jizos in there. So Monju is sometimes shown as a monk, like ours is, but Jizo almost always is shown like this. Shaved head, simple clothing, wearing a robe of some kind, usually has a staff with rings on the top, right? So one of the important activities that Jizo does, Jizo goes into the hell realms. If you look at the Rokudo, Jizo is the one that goes into the hell realms to save beings, right? So that shaking that staff, that sound is supposed to be awakening us from our delusions, helping us break free from samsara, helping us attain awakening, right? So usually
patience and
salvation from suffering, because Jizo is going to go into the hell realms and pull you out, right? Okay, so Jizo has the staff, sometimes also has a wish granting jewel. So these 2 things together are the tools for saving these beings. That jewel is kind of blessings, bestowing blessings on suffering beings. Please.
he's also like a sort of patron saint of staying for children, travelers, and a couple other things.
Yep.
But he's also immense in pop culture, within Japanese pop culture. There's some movie my cousin loves, and he's like, I'm 30th watch of it, and like, we're watching it as we're going off to a hike, and everybody's looking, and part of the movie is a little girl gets lost. When they find her, in the background there are 6 figures.
Yes.
Jizo's usually with like 6 figures, and he so Jizo is there in the background, helped save the child.
Yep.
When I explained this to my cousin, he's like, "Oh no, I had no clue."
There you go. That sounds familiar, which makes me wonder if I've seen that movie.
Totoro or something like that.
I don't remember, but that sounds familiar.
So don't they use those in Japan, sort of like grave markers for children?
Sometimes they're on graves. Yep. So you can see lots of Jizo pictures. Sometimes there's a row of 6 of them outside of the temple or in the graveyard. So yes, you beat me to it, but yes, Jizo, if you're going to do something called a patron saint, Jizo is a protector of children and pregnant women and mothers and travelers and pilgrims and suffering beings. So lots of groups. Okay. So those 4 images, personifications of elements that we consider are important for our practice. So compassion, of course, huge for us. Practice activity, goodness, yes. Wisdom and patience in liberating beings. That sounds like a bodhisattva to me. So wisdom and compassion, of course, practice and patience in liberating beings. So we might take inspiration from them, just like we might take inspiration from a figure of Shakyamuni, a figure of the Buddha. They just let us remember our aspiration. So if we have figures, pictures, something around, they can help us remember. Remember to practice, remember to cultivate wisdom, remember to show compassion, remember to be patient. But also, all of us who practice are considered bodhisattvas. So we have, and these are only 4 bodhisattvas. There's a long list of other bodhisattvas. You can find lots of them. There's one about studying, and there's lots of them. So we can anthropomorphize, and we can make figures, and we can make deities, and we can conflate Kanon with Virgin Mary and all kinds of things. And also, we are not separate from that activity. So just simply to begin to practice is to vow to be a bodhisattva. So, we do here before at the end of the Dharma talk, we chant those 4 vows. It means we're all already bodhisattvas. We're all already doing these things. Enough about that. So as bodhisattvas, we can just sort of remember we are the physical embodiment of this reality that samsara and nirvana are not separate. We are Buddha nature. We already know the self is empty, and yet we're using this karmic body and our karmic circumstances for the work of liberating beings. So just like these 4 figures are doing that, right? They've chosen to stay in the world of samsara, to keep a physical body, and to use that along with their understanding and their compassion and wisdom to save beings. We can say we're doing the same thing. We have physical form. We have vowed to bring wholesomeness into the world, to help to liberate ourselves and others. So those 2 realities are completely interpenetrated. So what questions do people have about bodhisattvas before we just sort of open it to things at large? Please.
Shakyamuni Buddha statues.
Yes.
We say it references a historical person.
Mm-hmm.
What about bodhisattvas? Are they referencing historical people, or are they more metaphorical persons that are patron saints?
Yeah, bodhisattvas are typically not based in historical beings. There are figures that are popular figures that attain a sort of a mythical status. But I think it would be hard to say there was a being who ultimately became Kanon. There was a being who ultimately became Manjushri.
On the Tibetan system, they say the Dalai Lama is an incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, so
yes.
there's that.
Yes.
But no, in the Tibetan system, they're understood as kind of a mythological constructs of antecedent energies related to the powers of awakening.
That's why I just characterize it as it's an embodiment of something that we can aspire to. Right? Other things from you?
No, that was it.
Did you have a hand up as well?
Yeah, I was wondering, which is that figure?
This here is Shakyamuni.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
so
Yeah.
then why do you switch them during like sessions?
Okay, so it's actually, we're not switching it during the session. We sometimes switch these if we're doing liturgy here, we're doing a service here, because you would have Shakyamuni in a Dharma hall where you're doing liturgy. So if we're using this space, like to do Buddha's awakening ceremony or something, we switch those. If we're sitting zazen, it's typically Manjushri. And then of course,
now in Japan, you'd have 2 different rooms.
It's 2 different buildings.
So we're basically trying to compact function. You have 2 rooms in one.
Right. So I'm sure we all know there is a figure of Avalokiteshvara Kanon out in the garden in the little house. We have a little, for those at home who haven't been here, we have a little garden shrine with Kanon out there. And it's a figure with multiple arms. That form of Kanon is a multiple arm figure of Kanon. So we're trying to get everyone represented. We don't have a Jizo and we don't have a Shingen, but the day may come. I see a hand up, I think it's Callum.
I'm just wondering the connection between Soto Zen and Manjushri, and why Manjushri in particular is in the Zendo.
Well, if we're sitting zazen, one of the things that will happen, although we're not aimed at it, is that we're cultivating wisdom. Now, we could also say we're cultivating compassion. So there's probably a story there, but all I can tell you is that is the convention. If we're sitting Zazen, we're sitting with Monju. Yeah. Other questions, comments, reflections about anything tonight? I actually left us enough time to have discussion. Although we moved fairly quickly. Things people want to say or ask about this week or previous. I've stunned you all into silence.
All right, so